Good morning. Thank you, Belinda. Given that you describe as an expert, I hope my best will be enough in responding to any questions. Audacity is a huge piece of software, and we're barely dipping a toe, I suppose, into it. But yeah, hopefully I'll be able to answer any questions. The reason for not kind of stockpiling them to the end is because we'll be going into lots of features, and it could be that you want me to go over a feature again and you might forget the name of that feature I talked about. So if we leave it 20 minutes, I might forget what you're talking about and you might forget what it was called. So I'd much rather just drop them in the chat and say, listen, can you go over that again? There'll be lots of me doing something, undoing it, and then doing it again. It's that sort of iterative process. So apologies in advance for that. And apologies if I'm, there might be elements here that you're already comfortable with, already familiar with, that you've mastered. Of course, there might be one or two people in the room who were still a bit uncertain, and that's fine. So I've got a few different screens to share, so bear with me 1 second. And I'll get it from Zoom. Okay. Can we see a screen? Yeah. Okay, that's the first hurdle. So this is called, this is a webinar, as I said, for the Your Digital Story project. It's called the Basic Editing Techniques for Your Podcast. And that word basic is exactly what it means. But if you've never done this before, then I appreciate that some of this might seem quite advanced, relatively speaking. But compared to what you can do in Audacity, this is relatively modest and basic, as I said. That's my contact details on the different platforms that you need to be on these days. Yeah, really grateful to Sport and Heritage and Art Fund for the opportunity to impart maybe some of my wisdom, such as it's that. In terms of my chops for this, I've been doing podcasts for about 6 years now. 2014, I first started the one on the left, which is a podcast about the Welsh football team, which me and a few mates just kind of got together and started doing. And since then, it's kind of grown to do stuff around community development, which is actually what I tend to do more as a career. I've worked in the voluntary community sector in Wales for the last 20 odd years. I've also contributed to other people's podcasts, whether those are newspapers like The Guardian, Golwg is a Welsh language publication down here, BBC, and so on. So seeing it from different sides of the mic, as it were, both recording them for other people, recording for my own ends, and then also participating for other people. So I've probably produced over 200 episodes now, all told, for all different people, and mainly for myself. And much of what I know about Audacity, I've learned through doing. Simple as that. So what are we going to hope to achieve today? So specifically, as a broad learning outcome, I'm aiming for you to have confident use of the basic and core features of Audacity for editing your podcast. Subjectively, I'm saying core. There might be certain things that you want to know that fall outside of this, and apologies for that in advance. These are the things that I tend to use the most, often, most routinely, maybe dozens and dozens of times within each episode that I'm editing, that I'm producing. And so therefore, that's my definition of core. There's features that I've used maybe 3 or 4 times or a handful of times ever. I'm not really touching on those today. That would be for maybe another level. And in terms of basic, it's some of the basic things that allow you just to improve the raw audio quality, the audio quality of your raw audio, and some of the basic kind of editing features. I say Audacity, it's the one I use. It's free software. If you aren't already familiar with it, to download, there are others out there. I would always encourage people to have a play around with as much as you can find, really. I wouldn't say that anyone ever really needs to spend any money on editing software, because it's really unnecessary. You'll soon see how much you can do in Audacity. And like I said, if it's free, then make the most of it. So specifically to achieve that outcome, we are going to look at some of the techniques around improving the audio quality, learning how to import additional tracks, and that's particularly important given the clean feed software that I introduced in the first webinar, because clean feed's really, has really found its feet, I suppose, this year, given that we're doing things a lot online, socially distant, and perhaps will be doing that for some time to come. We'll learn how to set some background audio to spoken word, so background music perhaps, or it could be a sound effect, like crowd noise, for example. But we'll look at how we do that, and that's called is it enveloping or enveloping? Potato, but we'll be looking at that anyway. A key thing for me, actually, and I probably took a couple of years maybe to get my head around this and to realise, it was kind of wood for the trees. Whatever you need to do to your track is one thing. If you can quickly and effectively and efficiently navigate your way around your file and around the software, it doesn't feel like you're making progress a lot more than if you're forgetting where you are. How do I go back to this? Where was that bit I saw? That bit that they were talking about. So the navigation of your track is something I'm really quite keen to impress on people. Navigating isn't actually doing anything to your track by way of an edit, cutting, pasting, chopping, whatever. It's just you feeling like you're making progress a lot quicker. That isn't half the battle, ain't half the battle when it comes to things like confidence. And then finally, we'll be looking at splitting, labeling, and reordering tracks, basically moving them around. Okay, if there's any questions to that, if you were expecting something else, or you wanted me to talk about the Nyquist prompt or any of the kind of obscure features, then sorry. As I said, that's for another lesson. Just having a look in the chat again. Feel free to not just questions, any comments as well, reflections. Put your own kind of horrible experiences of editing together and completely losing your audio. I've done that before. Quick plug as well to Katie. I think Katie, I can see Katie's with us. Terrific effort on I think it's your first, isn't it? The Run Young 50 podcast you've done. It's only 4.5 minutes, but it's absolutely tip top. It's better than my first ever effort, I'm pretty certain. So that's over on SoundCloud. I'd encourage you to drop the link into the chat, Katie, because it's well worth a listen. And encourage people to leave a comment on that as well, which I did this morning. So unless there's any questions specific about what we're hoping to achieve, I will crack on. There we go. So yeah, what we won't be covering, all of the features of Audacity would be here till probably January 2022 if we were to do that. I won't be discussing anything around equipment and hardware. And as I always sort of say, I won't be making any recommendations for purchase or anything like that of either hardware or software. If anything, I'm making a recommendation not to purchase software. You've got it all free on the internet. I'm making the assumption here as well that you've got your raw audio, that you've been able to record it, that you're comfortable with your mic, you've hooked it all up, etc., etc. Whether you're happy with the audio quality is another thing, but you at least have it. And that's the starting point, really. We're not going to be recording anything today. And really, what I'm not encouraging you to do, feel free to, but I'm not encouraging you to, is to aspire for anything grand by way of production values that's polished, that's glitzy, that's professional, that's, BBC World Service standard and so on. I'd say for the podcast, generally, those aren't really needed because people are listening to you, they're listening to Katie, for example, because they want their experience, they want their passion, they want their enthusiasm. They're not listening because she's the BBC's running or athletics correspondent. They know where to go if they want to listen to that person and those perspectives. So yeah, we're not really aiming that high. But if you're a purist and a perfectionist, then feel free. Be my guest to aim a little bit higher for yourselves beyond today. Quick plug for why we're doing this at all under the badge of Sport and Heritage. The 2017 conference in Bradford was the first time that the organisation really dipped its toe into this kind of media. I was in attendance. I sang for my supper. I didn't pay to go to the conference, but I recorded lots of different content with people, mainly kind of reflecting on the day's proceedings, maybe reflecting on specifically their presentation that they delivered with one or two others. We just tried to capture a little bit of the immediacy and a bit of the energy of the conference, which is great if you're there experiencing it. But if you couldn't make it for whatever reason, then obviously you should sort of miss out. So that was the sort of the motive behind it. Moved a long way since then. We recorded at the subsequent conferences in Liverpool, Cardiff. Sadly, we weren't able to be in person in Stirling this year. We've also got it increasingly written into projects that Sport and Heritage either run or lead or co-lead around Sport and Heritage of the Armed Forces, and a specific project funded by Sport England that's only in England around disability and women's sport and the Sport and Heritage of that. And those will depend on the funding, depend on the outcomes of those initial projects. I think we had about 6 episodes for the armed forces, and I think it's about 8 or 9 for the Disability and Women's Sport Project. And then we do standalone episodes as and when they crop up. So a quick plug for the one with Julia. Julia's the woman with the whistle in her mouth at the bottom of the screen. Julia and I got together last week to record something looking back over her career as a woman in rugby league. Absolutely fascinating. And I'm hoping to get that done and dusted and produced by the end of play tomorrow. And then a quick plug for Jamie. Jamie's in the room. 90 Minutes of Freedom was one of those sort of standalone episodes, I suppose, where Jamie had spent a season in 2018-19, I think it was, with Wales's only prison football team, Prescoed, which is an open prison, a Category D prison in Monmouthshire. And Jamie spent the season with them, wrote a book about their experiences and his experiences with them called 90 Minutes of Freedom. And we were able to get permission eventually. It took a while, but we got permissions to go on site. We recorded with one of the senior members of staff there, with Jamie, but also with the captain of the team. Ordinarily wouldn't really be allowed, I suppose, to take part in this sort of thing. And again, it was just a way of just bringing to life that book a little bit more. And I think that's what this medium is really, really good at doing. It's quite reflective, quite deliberative, quite an intimate experience. People do tend to listen in a solitary way on headphones, or maybe in the car, when they're in the gym, walking the dog. So it's a very immersive medium, and I think it's a particularly useful one for the heritage sector. Okay, there's a glossary of terms that I circulated before the first webinar. I'm going to break down some of the other terms being used specifically for Audacity today, but we can share that again. But again, if any terminology isn't clear, please ask. If you want to ask me privately because you really feel the question is too stupid to ask publicly, it isn't, but even if you still feel that anyway, feel free to message me privately in the chat, and I'll do my best to keep half an eye on that. I can see Katie's dropped the link in, and good on for doing that. Okay, so editing. Why do we edit? There's a few tweets I've seen over the years that I think encapsulate a particular view. As a man, I must confess, I probably cringe a little bit at this and kind of go, yeah, I know what he's getting at there. But give you a few seconds to read those. The reality is, as much as you might want to do this medium, engage in this medium, have these conversations made available for people who share similar concerns, share similar passions and interests, the reality is, it is a sort of a two-way street, if you like. And I have talked in the previous webinar and others around how it's not just about listeners. It's not around followers, because we can import that social media to the followers into this sort of work in this sort of sector. It's more around, I think, potentially the sense of creating a sense of community, and that needs to be a bit more of a two-way street. So you need to listen to what people are saying about your podcast eventually, even if they might be a little bit sort of passive aggressive about it on Twitter and over to your face or in your comments. It's worth trying to canvass the feedback from people, both in terms of the quality and also the content, so the audio quality, but also the content, quality of the content. And so for me, there's 4 reasons why we edit, or 4 broad headings. It's for that quality. It's to help establish an identity and to help with branding. Ultimately, I think it does save time, which might sound counterintuitive for anybody, and feel free to put a hand up if this is you, who's finds it a real tedious, labor-intensive, laborious, boring task, because it can be all of those things. But ultimately, it can potentially save you some time in terms of the overall production, from the recording, from the planning, the preparing through to the recording, to letting your podcast kind of out into the wider world. It can save time. I think it's also a thing around respect as well. So what do I mean by these? So quality. I talked in the first webinar about this sense of ear fatigue. If you have to really concentrate to listen to somebody, then that can be quite tiring. And what you need to do is to improve the quality, to make it easier for people to listen. If the effort is going into it, like anything, eventually we'll think this is not worth it, and we'll go elsewhere. We'll stop listening, we'll go listen to someone else, we'll never tune into a future episode again. Quite simply, you might need to increase or decrease the volume. It could be, you didn't notice it at the time, but it could be that one of your participants is a lot quieter than some of the others, and it just feels uneven. And again, that can be really, that can lead to that ear fatigue as well with people if they're having to really focus and concentrate to listen to the quieter people. But equally, they can be kind of terrified by that booming voice that comes in and they're having to take the headphones off or whatever. As even a volume is what you're hoping for. Easier said than done, though. You might need to remove those interruptions and those unwanted noises, particularly if we're doing these at home in socially distant conditions. It's the doorbell ringing, it's the phone ringing, it's the kids fighting, it's fire alarms going off. I've had that happen in a university setting. I've done these in the community and voluntary setting, so that's my background more broadly in terms of my career. And although you might want some background noise because it adds a bit of authenticity, it's around striking that balance. So you might need to edit to remove some of those interruptions. I think one of the key headaches I've had this year, I'd done them over the internet previously, many number of times. But this year was really pretty much the only time I'd ever done maybe 3 or 4 people and myself all over the internet. We're not in a physical space together. And what you begin to realize is how reliant your audio quality is on the quality of people's internet at home. And that's something that I've certainly had to coach myself to do, is to kind of interrogate that a little bit by way of, in terms of the preparation, the planning and preparation stage. I've said to people, look, if you've got kids in the house who are going to be gaming and downloading stuff off Netflix or whatever, you might need them to not do that for the hour we've got set aside, because it just makes demands of the bandwidth. I think I'm no expert on this, but I think it's certainly my experience. I had to upgrade my home internet earlier in the year because 3 kids being homeschooled, my wife working at home, etc., to get the quality internet that give the required sort of integrity and quality for the audio that I wanted to capture from people. I needed to do that. So that's something to bear in mind as well. So there's the audio quality. There's also the quality of the content you edit to have a better flow, to pace things better as well. Sometimes somebody can make a point, they then kind of go off topic and then they make the point again. You don't need all of that. Sometimes, as I say, less is more. Why put a 45-minute podcast out if you've made all of your points in 30? If you've done it in 30, then that's fine. Yeah, don't fill the time that you have available necessarily. It can sometimes be useful to edit out some people, as polite as I possibly can be. Some people will dominate a conversation. Sometimes you need to take a little bit out of one person just to restore that balance. And that might just be a balance of kind of equity, if you like. Not that I ever have a stopwatch and I time the contributions of everybody, but it could be around balance of gender voices, for example. If someone is speaking English as a second language, they might not contribute as much as someone who's for whom English is their first language. So you might want to just balance that out in terms of contributors. I've listened to podcasts where I've probably produced a couple in the early days where you don't hear from somebody for 7 minutes and then they pop back into the room, into the recording. You think, oh yeah, that person, what's his name? So it's important to try to just be aware of those things in terms of the quality of the content. And again, it all makes for a better listening experience. I record with somebody on a routine basis who will make a point and makes a perfectly cogent one. It's well delivered, it's concise, but then has the awful habit of saying, so as I said, and then makes it again. We don't need that. That is how we speak. Very naturally, I understand that, but we don't really need it for a podcast. So he gets chopped up and left on the cutting room floor quite a bit. I think he's come to terms with it now. One of the things, particularly again in this format, doing it online, doing it in socially distant conditions, is the need sometimes, or certainly what I like to think is just nice and courteous, is the prompts, is those reassuring comments. If someone is doing this for the first time, tell them that they're doing really, really well. It will be recorded, and clearly you want to get rid of that, but tell them that was a really good point. That's fascinating. You hadn't thought of that. You're part of the conversation invariably. So put those comments in. You might feel that you don't need those as part of the finished product, so you will have to edit those out. But they're part of making the conversation a much more natural one. And that will ultimately improve the flow because people feel more confident, they feel a bit more involved and participative and so on. Very often we will cover all of the ground that we think we wanted to cover. I might want to do my wrapping up, my summing up, maybe repeat those small asks that I remember that I told you about in the first webinar. But before I do that, I just want to double check with people. Okay, I'll edit all this out. Is there anything else you want to say? Have we covered all the ground? Yeah, give people a chance to kind of to pause, to go through their notes, to rustle the papers and so on. You'll want to get rid of all of that. All of that helps ultimately create a better podcast. People also get tongue-tied. They'll forget names. They'll call somebody Paul when they meant Peter. They'll say .com instead of .co.uk. So sometimes you need to go back and re-record some of those bits, either within the recording session, or you might find as you're editing that that bit just doesn't work, or the internet dropped out for somebody and you've just got to phone them up or email them and say, listen, can we just do that bit again where you were talking about running in that competition, winning that medal, because it just I haven't got it for whatever reason. I've yet to find anybody, and I do this fairly often actually, I've yet to find anybody who's ever, annoyed, irritated, refused to do it. Ultimately, it's in their interests. So don't be shy and kind of going back to somebody and saying, do you know what, I've messed it up, that bit didn't work, that bit isn't clear, there's an interruption, my skill set isn't quite, where it needs to be to manage that particular interruption or sound or whatever. It's all fine. Identity and branding. You might want to add a theme tune, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment, but please be aware of copyright issues. That Free Music Archive link is a link to a vast database of free and rights-free music that you're welcome to use, invariably with some sort of credits to the musician and the producer of that music. But it's there to use, so I encourage you using that. But there's others out there as well. Tends to be my go-to. You sometimes have to wade through a lot of rubbish before you find the track you need. Bear that in mind. So don't go looking for a track 5 minutes before you've agreed to make something go live, because you'll really struggle to find something. So like I said, adding the standard intros and outros, what that does, it helps develop that consistency and that familiarity with listeners. And that is important because there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of other podcasts that people will be listening to, whether that's for their work or for pleasure. So the moment that theme tune kicks in, the moment that first voice is heard talking about what you're about to listen to, people go, oh, I know where I am now. Back in the room, I understand what I'm going to be listening to. I'm going to remember those other quality podcasts I listen to, and you're grabbing their attention without kind of shouting at them, without forcing it. And it's all very, very. I'm no marketing professional, but there's something in that comforting of the comfort of the familiar, I suppose. It might be, however, that you find, it takes, half a dozen episodes before you find the theme tune that you really, really want. But of course, you could go back and you could change it, and so on, all of which is related to the editing process. And like I said, in terms of saving time, ultimately, it will begin to help you do better and do better quicker the more you edit. Particularly if you have to make a standard reference like we do with the Sport England podcast, a standard reference to the funder, to the partner, to the people involved, so on and so forth. Pre-record it once. You don't have to keep saying it every subsequent episode that you're recording. Okay, I can see that the chat has been flashing. Let me just take a little look. Okay, oral history is different. Yeah. I'm not touching on interviewing techniques here, conversation techniques. I tend to sort of say to people that the best podcasts are conversations rather than formal kind of interviews. But a formal interview might be what you're wanting to do, for example. But yeah, certainly there's some way in which you can approach the conversation, a lot of which is down in the planning and the preparation, that crib sheet that I circulated previously. Cool. Okay. And Katie's hoovering up subscribers. Should have more than Sport and Heritage at this rate. Okay. Okay, the last element is respect. I love these newspaper clippings. I think ultimately, like I said, it's this two-way street. I think if people are giving up of their time to listen to you and your friends, your colleagues, your wider Sport and Heritage community, then I think the least you can do is respect that and put some effort into the planning, the preparation, the editing, and so on, the overall kind of effort you're putting in. But it's all commensurate with your confidence, with your competence, with the time and the capacity you have available. Most people listening to these things recognise that people are giving, that they're making the work fit in around the work and other responsibilities, particularly this year of all years. Most listeners are genuinely forgiving of little errors here and there, or drop in quality, or that background noise, or whatever. But ultimately, as I said, some people will be quite perfectionists, and their sort of self-esteem will push them to edit for that enhanced quality, however so they define it. But yeah, just respect the fact that people are giving it their time to listen. So, enthusiasm, knowledge, and clarity. For me, they're kind of like the three basic elements of a podcast. And the sweet spot is somewhere there where people's enthusiasm is clear, but it's not running away with them so that they're bouncing all over the place and they're zipping between topics and you're kind of a bit punch drunk as to what they're actually trying to say. They're not overly knowledgeable, but very dull and droning on, and they're slow and ponderous. But clearly knowledgeable. You need a bit of enthusiasm to kind of get you through the episode. Equally, it could be the clearest thing. It could be crystal clear. That will service quality, but if the knowledge and enthusiasm isn't there, people aren't going to be listening. People don't listen just for quality. Yeah, they listen for a bit of enthusiasm, a bit of passion. They listen for that knowledge, that sense that who they're listening to is an authority on a topic, and that authority isn't defined by titles like professor and doctor and letters after the name. It's by being involved in the support for 50 years that can make them an authority on something. So what you want is a sweet spot that's more or less in the middle. If it is right at the tip of one of these corners of the triangle, then what you can do is in the editing process is just bring it back a little. But what you can't do is put in what was left out in the first place. If somebody didn't make that point that you'd said you were going to cover in the planning, editing is not going to help you. That's where you've got to go back and re-record. You've got to go back and ask for people's time and so on. Okay. I mentioned about preparing guests in the first webinar. Very quickly, it's fine to stop, compose, start again. It all gets an edit. Reassure people. I always say we start when everyone is okay to start. Yeah, what I tend to do as well, and this is a little tip of my own, is this goes beyond to Audacity, is that you record all of this and you are looking at the levels, you are tweaking the different levels of mics and things like that as you're recording all of this. That is a bit of your prep. So you're reassuring people, you're prepping yourself, you're checking your levels. And what you might find is you've got 5, 10, I've been known to 15, 20 minutes of audio that I'm not going to do anything with, and I'll chop out. But equally, sometimes people say something that's really interesting, and it's kind of like, I'm going to keep that because I'm going to drop that in a little bit later. That was really good. So it can be useful to kind of record all of that preamble, if you like. And it also helps to get people a little bit more relaxed. Okay, Audacity. I will drop these links in a moment into the chat. It's a University of Sheffield guide. It's a PDF. It's a number of documents. It's free out there. I think if you're to use it, you need to credit, as I am doing. University of Sheffield, somebody somewhere, possibly a decade or more ago, went through the early versions of Audacity and just plucked out for students, I'm assuming, and staff, some of the basic elements. It's a real good aid memoir for anything I say today, not anything and everything, but several elements I'm going to cover today. And then in the nature of open source software these days, there is Audacity community has its own wiki, and that covers a wealth of things to do with Audacity. There's also additional forums out there that you can find. And usually if you can't find the answer in either of those, go on those message boards. There's always somebody more expert, more knowledgeable, more experienced than you. Because it could be that you don't know what you need to ask, if that makes sense, but you know what you want to achieve. And so you're asking the question in a bit of a roundabout way, if that makes sense. And those forums can be really useful for that. Okay, so glossary. I mentioned a glossary more generally for podcasting technology or medium more broadly a bit earlier, and we can circulate that again. But in terms of specifically here and now on Audacity, here's some terminologies for you. The control toolbar. Toolbars you'll be familiar with things like Microsoft Word, Excel, etc. The control bar is something that you'll spend an awful lot of time using, but you won't necessarily be clicking on it after a while. There are plenty of shortcuts on your keyboard that you can use that are a proxy for actually clicking on the actual buttons. But you'll be familiar with most of those buttons from your old tape recorders, you were taping the charts on a Sunday afternoon, or from a CD player and so on. The mixer toolbar, we're not spending a lot of time on the mixer toolbar, but it's important to know what it is about. When you are editing, you can control the one on the left because that is your output volume. The mic is the volume of the device coming in, so it controls the volume into your initial recording. Once you've done it, you can't tweak anything. So it's just important to know that it's there, but we're not spending any time on that. But that's your mixer toolbar. We've also got these zoom in and out functions, which are really, really useful eventually. But again, there's some shorthands. I'm not spending any time on this bottom left, project sample rate. The standard for Audacity, I think, is 44,000 bit rate. That sounds probably techie. I record at 48,000 because that's what clean feed requires me to do. Well, ideally requires me to do. So you'll see 48,000 in the bottom corner of my screen in a moment, but don't worry about that. But if you're using a different platform, you might need to just be clear at the outset when you're using it, which is its preferred bitrate. That is as complicated as I'm going to get today. Okay. And it's, like I said, it's software specific. Okay. And this big gray expanse is the work area. Okay. If there's any questions on any of that, need me to repeat any of that, then let me know. But I'll be using these terms. So it's important you begin to get familiar with them now. Okay, just zooming in on the control toolbar. As I said, you've got play, record, pause. You'll be familiar with these. These 6 here, it's got 2 specifically highlighted, selection tool and the time shift tool. We'll be focusing on both of those. The standard sort of default is the selection tool, and it looks exactly like it would if you were in Word and you were word processing. Typing an essay, you wanted to put a full stop at the start, you would click at the end of a word. That sort of liney, brackety thing, cursor is what you have, and it's the standard. A lot of these symbols, a lot of the terminology is very similar. Some of the shortcuts, for example, Control and V for paste, Control and C for cut, they're exactly the same. So if you're familiar with the kind of the Microsoft Office suite, that's a significant hurdle that you've already got past. Time shift tool we'll be looking at. Really, really handy tool, particularly when you're recording different tracks, which I will explain a bit more in a bit. What isn't labeled, sorry, here, but is nevertheless what we're going to be using, this one with the blue line through the middle, is enveloping. I'm still not sure. Enveloping. It's that, and I'll show you a little bit about what that does in due course. That's a really good, I love that tool. You don't use it enough or a lot. It comes into play when you're looking to talk over a backing track or a backing sound. Okay. You don't need to worry about the others really. The star, the star is all of these combined. What I tend to find, and certainly found in the early days, was if I thought that's going to be a labor-saving device, rather than have to click from time shift to the envelope tool, I've got them all in the star. You start getting yourself into a bit of a muddle really in the early days. Certainly I did anyway. So all the star is all of the others combined, but you don't really need that for the time being. So then again, last couple of terminologies, audio track. So I keep talking about tracks, and you'll see why I'm talking about tracks, plural, as opposed to a track. In a moment, the waveform is basically the blue noise in the middle. Okay. There's some other things here that I'll talk about in terms of mute and solo in due course, but those are sort of like the headline glossary terms. So specifically, if any of you have got like a little checklist, you said, I hope he covers this, I hope he talks about gain, I hope he talks about splitting, now's your time to do the bingo, the checklist. Okay, so I've broken them down into, I think it's 5 overall categories of navigation, volume, editing specifically in a technical sense, music, soundtracks, and finalizing the podcast. So by way of navigation, we're going to look at importing, labeling, mastering the file and your project file. So not mastering, so master files and project files. So mastering means something else in this terminology, sorry. Zoom, in and out. Naming your tracks, very good, navigating. Muting and unmuting tracks, really, really good, useful tool. Solo tracks and sync locking. Sync locking is a game changer. When I really got my head around sync locking, wow. And the volume, 3 simple elements: gain, amplify, which is probably the one we'll focus on. The silence is good as well. And there's a specific sort of definition, I suppose, of the term. So it's like silence in this context has a specific Audacity definition. Okay, and it's not the same as people aren't talking. Okay, but I'll come back to that. Editing, cut, copy, and paste, very, very straightforward. Noise reduction is a good one. Splitting, again, a bit of a game changer, and is related to the time shift tool. Fading in and out, which is probably about as as kind of that high value production feature that we're going to touch on. It's a nice way of just easing into an episode. Before, any number of us have listened to it, it's kind of silent, 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 and then it starts, and it's pretty terrifying. Fade in just brings people into the room. Fade out is also that technique that goes, okay, it's now coming to an end. It's simple, it's ever so obvious, but it's really, really helpful. Fading in and out is also really good if you've got a break in the conversation. So, for example, the time I was at Cardiff Metropolitan University and the fire alarm went off in the middle of recording. I was like, what was I going to do? Start again? We didn't have the time. I thought, let's just make light of it because it happens. So I faded out the fire alarm, and then I sort of made a joke of this, having to reconvene. We ended up kind of getting a coffee. It was about half an hour break. We'd lost the flow. We couldn't possibly get back to where we were, but we had other things to say. So I then just faded back in. So you can just fade in and out in the middle of the recording of your episode, not just at the beginning, at the end. And you begin to get a bit more confident and kind of go, I'm okay to do this. This is my podcast or our podcast. I think this works. And so, that assertiveness, that confidence to do it is really, really important. It's a really useful tool. Music and soundtracks, so we're adding a track. So I keep talking about tracks, enveloping, and then the voiceovers, which is that envelope tool. And then we'll be looking at normalizing, exporting, i.e. turning it into an MP3, because an Audacity file is not usable for anybody outside of Audacity, and it is enormous. The metadata, which is a real key for keeping, it's part of that respecting your listener, your following, your community, is giving them the details. What is this podcast about? Katie's done it perfectly on the SoundCloud descriptor text of her episode. By listening to this podcast, you will hear about X, Y, and Z. And that metadata is really, really important. And then some things on file storage, again, related to bringing it right back to navigation. It's more about basic IT literacy than anything to do with Audacity or anything to do with podcasts. But you can get into a mess if you haven't kind of stored your files properly, particularly if you want to use files, your pre-recording intros and outros that you want to keep using for subsequent episodes. So there's some things there as well, and hopefully we'll get there. Any questions on any of that? Is there anything that anybody sort of said, I want you to do auto ducking? Why are you doing auto ducking?
Russell, we've had one question from Jamie. He wants to import a previous recorded MP4 file and wants to do some jiggery pokery to make it a specific audio file more fit for purpose.
I would use, so bear with me, I've got it here somewhere. I would use, so my browser of choice is Google Chrome. It might actually see a little bit how I organize my life, and there's far too many tabs, I know, is into apps, and you can download it. Is this, what do they call this? I forget what they call these things now. It's like a little plugin, if you like, within the Google, the Chrome store, is this audio converter. That will convert it for you. Okay, it converts into any number of formats that I have no idea what they actually are either. What you can then do with that MP4, convert it to MP3 or WAV or whatever else, and then you can drop it into Audacity, and I'll be showing you how to do that in a moment. Yeah, but Audacity will take a few formats, but it doesn't take everything. The simplest thing to do is just play around with it, is what I would say. But that audio converter within Chrome is a useful, I don't know why it's grayed out. That might be because I'm sharing, I don't know. But anyway, that audio converter there is a useful tool. Does that possibly answer it or give a possible answer?
Yeah, thanks, Russell.
Okay, let me get back to where I was. Okay, so like I said, Clean Feed, that's what I've been using. Clean Feed records via the internet in this way. Right, I've just moved you all down to the bottom. Let's move you back up there. So I set up a Clean Feed recording. This is me doing something around football with a couple of my chums with my footballing podcast recently. And what Clean Feed does, it sets you up as the main recorder, the host. You then start recording, and that then is read. So I know that it's recording. You'll see the little timer there, 0:36. That was at the start. And my other two contributors were Gareth and Leon, and they get their individual track. And what Clean Feed does within Chrome is is the best performing browser, the most secure browser. It will work in others, but not all. Is the browser records them. And so you can set it in different ways, but the best thing is I just record me. So if I walk out the door and I, leave them, gassing on for a few minutes, and that door slams behind me, my microphone will pick that up, but it won't pick it up on their tracks, only on my track, which makes editing so much simpler than in the old days, or if you were recording all in the room, all into Audacity around a single mic. That noise is really difficult to get rid of. Okay, so that's why I like Clean Feed. Certainly in this conditions that we've been recording and listening to producing podcasts this year. Okay, I covered Clean Feed a little bit more detail in the last webinar, so I'm not going to say any more than that. But if you have recorded, you have then downloaded the individual tracks. Don't worry about clips. And I get three tracks with exactly as you name them. So I could put in their contact details, I could put a phone number, I could put an email in there. For all of those prompts, it will record whatever names I give them to those tracks. I then download them as a zip file, okay? And you then need to unzip them. So I'm assuming that you kind of know this sort of stuff in order to get to the stage that I'm about to show you. It's not particularly complicated, but until you've mastered it and you know what I'm talking about, then of course this could be all new to you. It will unzip them. This maybe relates back to the point that Jamie made, to WAV files. Most of us, presumably if we listen to music on our phones or the old iPods, etc., probably listen to MP3. You might not, but chances are you do. Audio files, it gives you these in WAV files. It gives them exactly the name that you've got them. I've saved them in my particular folder, so I know where they are, and that is as much information as you get. It doesn't give you any file title names, it hasn't numbered them, it doesn't tell you anything else really apart from the fact that they're WAV files, okay? I then have two options. I can then open up Audacity, and I can go to File, Import, Audio. I technically have three options. I could use that Control-Shift and I go straight to it, but I can't possibly remember all of the shortcuts. That's one I haven't remembered. File, Import, Audio. I then find where I've stored them as you would open a Word document, as you would open a spreadsheet and so on, and it then drops them in, okay? Alternatively, I can literally go to the folder, I can highlight them all, or I can highlight one at a time, and I can literally drag and drop as you would in Windows Explorer, okay? But I'm not going to do that now because these are big files and it takes time, and my computer then goes, I'm not doing anything else while you're doing this. So you go and put your feet up, put the kettle on, and we'd get a bit bored. So here's one I prepared earlier, as somebody once said. Is that clear? File, import audio to drop your WAV file in. Audacity will go, it's a WAV file. I'm going to convert it into a waveform and an Audacity file, and that will be what is workable for the person at the wheel, so to speak. And this is what you would get. And so it's a little bit blurred. I blew it up a bit too much. Okay, so you get three tracks. So for example, me, Gareth, Leon. Immediately, from the moment you look at it, okay, you can kind of tell. It comes with experience, admittedly, but eventually you tell that one is about right, the top one, the correct recording level. The middle one, it's too quiet. That's going to be a real struggle to listen. The recording level has been too low. And the last one, the recording level is too high. Basically, if the waveform hits, indeed goes beyond the top of the track, okay, it is too high. It doesn't mean it can't be used. It might mean that it's not ideal, but you can rescue some of these elements, okay? So file, import, audio, drag and drop into Audacity, into the work area. And after a while, because it takes a little bit of time, depending on the speed of your computer, clearly, you get these three tracks. Chat is flashing. I don't know if there's a question for me. Oops. And so I will stop sharing for a moment. And I will go into Audacity. Let's look at the chat 1 second. And vice versa, I just overlap the speaking, the music tracks. Yeah, in terms of the enveloping and the voiceovers, that is all you're doing, but you can just enhance the quality of it, I suppose. Yeah, we'll come to that. We'll come to that. Yes, in Zoom. Yes, in Zoom, do you get a separate audio file? Yes, you do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you do. And I think I want to say Teams. Is it Teams or is it one of the other ones? I can't remember, but yeah. I mean, like I said, you can use that audio converter. There's other ones out there as well, I'm sure. There's some that will charge you that you can pay for. I guess that's a premium service that some of these offer. I'd be surprised if anyone really has to go to the extent of like paying money to tease the audio out of a filmed sort of track. I use YouTube quite a bit. I'm not covering it today because you've got to configure your recording, your mixer bit. But if you are looking to record from YouTube, it can be done, and it can make a real good, copyright permitting, of course, it can make a real good production, add a real good production value to your recording as well. It's doable, but that's not what we can do today. I can possibly record a literally 2 or 3 minute thing for that. Maybe that might be something I can speak to Kate and Belinda about. Okay, so bear with me. Let's call up Audacity and then share the screen again. Okay, can everybody see Audacity? Thumbs up. Cool. Okay. So those 3 tracks that you saw, here's my 3 tracks. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I can do that in a number of ways. I can click on the magnifying glass for zoom out, zoom in for that matter. Okay. And I'm just basically moving out, moving further, because you just get to see more of your track in the whole thing. And you will notice the toolbar across the bottom is getting longer. Okay. The alternative to doing this is Control and 3, Control and 1 for zoom in, zoom out. And I tend to find that if you're also using your cursor to go into things like, effect, or you're maybe tweaking other things, that actually the Control and 1, Control and 2, Control and 3 are useful. So Control 3 would zoom me out. Control 2 is brilliant and a really good tip. It goes, right, okay, but that's all fun and good. I want to go back to where I was, just the standard default. So if this was Microsoft Word, 100%. So this I've probably come to about, I'm probably at about 60%. Okay, if this is equating this to Word or your browser, I want to go back to where I was, the 100%, and that's Control and 2. It takes you back, it's that shortcut. Yeah. If you get familiar with your right sort of scale, or the one that you're most comfortable at, it's a significant help in navigating your way around these things, around your files. Okay, so that's zooming in and zooming out. If I wanted to name these tracks, we'll talk about tracks. One of the things that we want to do about navigating them is making it clear who is speaking in which one. If this wasn't named coming in and it just said, track, I'd forget perhaps, particularly I've got 3 or 4 or 5 people contributing, I'd forget who was talking. So you can simply just click on that and you have the opportunity to rename it. So I can call it Gareth T, if there was also a Gareth J, for example, if they're both called Gareth. Okay, Leon is there, and then there's always me. Okay, now and for some people they prefer, and I did to begin with, it's just one of those features of personalizing these things. We'll have our little foibles. I always used to like editing the top track. Okay, and it sounds silly, but you can move track to the up. Okay, it's all under the name. So this is thing around reordering your tracks, moving them around. You are in control of these things, yeah? This software isn't in control of you. Now you might not know how to be in control of it yet, but you are able to do it. And again, you can just move the track back to the bottom. This is particularly useful if you want to drop in a track between a point that Leon says and Russell says, because it is your interlude where you bring in your theme tune and you just say, you are listening to a Sporting Heritage podcast. You are listening to a Stoolball podcast with me, Anita. I'm speaking to so-and-so guest. and then you go back. That's a nice way of just bringing somebody back into the conversation, bringing someone back in, because most people listen to podcasts while they're also multitasking. And it's a good way of just going, broken up the spoken word, bit of music, bring them back in. That way, you might want to drop that track in. So to moving them up and down is just a helpful way of knowing which bit am I going to drop that in, between whom and which point. So that's why I like just suggesting that. The muting and unmuting is really, really good. Now, this is a track that's been edited. Now, if I was to, okay, so you can see here that this is me, I don't know, maybe agreeing. Maybe Leon is making a point and I'm going, yeah, that's fine. Let's have a little listen. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
Well, Gaz is going to hate me for this, but I'm...
It was me chuckling. I chuckle a lot, actually. It was me a little chuckle.
Gaz is going to hate me for this, but I'm like you, going with only 7.
Okay, so if I want to go, oh, I didn't quite hear what you did there. What did I do? You solo that. So you can listen to just one track. So this is good. Now, if this was all of us in the room around a single mic recording straight into Audacity, it's really hard to isolate that, okay? The brilliant thing with Clean Feed is I've got individual tracks that have recorded just the individual person, notwithstanding maybe a tiny, tiny little bit of feedback that you get just through the technical bit, but almost you have to really concentrate to hear it. So I can finish my point here.
If it's Davis and Roberts.
A weird chuckle I've got. That I can go, I don't need that in there. I don't need that. You sound ridiculous for us, right? So the solo allows you to mute everything else and just listen to the one track. Really, really useful way of just getting rid of all of the clutter. I might even go, look, what's that noise there? I don't know, I don't like it, I don't think I need it. So silence. Silence doesn't mean someone isn't talking. It means nothing. And what it does, the Audacity takes out all of the noise, even the noise that you don't even hear, the noise that isn't there, the ambient within the room, the water pipe, the central heating pipes in the corner of the room, that car alarm that you don't hear under these, but yeah. So what silence is up here. I'll go where I don't need you, is this one here, okay? Or you highlight what you want exactly as you would in Microsoft Word. I don't want those lines, I don't want those words, I don't want that paragraph, I highlight. And then you click on, so I'm just going to go into that mode there. I'll explain the difference, so it's a little bit less going on the screen, okay? Silence, or Control and L, or generate and silence. Invariably, there's at least 2, sometimes 3, sometimes even 4 routes to the tool that you want. And it will be personal preference whether you go Control and the letter, whether you use the toolbar or whatever suits you. But into silence, and so I'm going to click on this. Please look at the highlighted bit on the track. 3, 2, 1, and it's gone. Okay. So I'll just undo that. And if you go, oh, I've silenced a bit too much, or I play back and go, oh, actually, no, the little weird chuckle actually is a nice kind of, it shows that we're interacting with each other. You just undo. Exactly as you would in Microsoft Word or Excel, it's Control and Z, or it's Edit, Undo. And if I wanted to undo the last 3 things I did, because I didn't like them, you just undo 3 times, or you click on these, go away, click on these arrows in the toolbar, again, which are very similar to Microsoft Word. Okay, so silence is really, really good for getting rid of those unwanted noises, okay? But don't be a Puritan about it and get rid of every single noise that isn't on someone's track. You know, you'll be your own judge. You will be your own perfectionist, or not, of course. Okay. Equally, to bring them all back in, you just click. So it's solo, and click it again to bring them all back in the room. So solo mutes everything else except the track you're on. Mute mutes yours and nobody else's. Okay, so if we had a waveform up here and the 3 of us were talking over one another, I could play around with it and I could just mute the top one and I could listen to just those 2. I could mute the middle one and I could just listen to Gareth and myself, and so on. So mute and solo, really, really good for just kind of homing in on the bits that you're going to want to edit or not, if you choose that you don't want to. Okay, So I've done zoom in and zoom out. I've done solo, did naming. Okay, labeling is a good one. Under edit, you have a label. Now, what you'll tend to find, particularly if you're recording for quite a number of minutes, this was an episode of about 35 minutes, I think. A bit different if you take Katie's, for example, which is about 4.5 minutes, yeah? You might, where is it that they talked about, you know, Pele scoring that goal, when they talked about, you know, Beyond Ball winning Wimbledon, when they talked about the first Henley Regatta? Where was that in the podcast? I tell you what, it was around here. Do it while you're talking, while you're editing, while they're talking. So what you do is you go to edit, label, okay, and you can add, whoops, and you can add a label at selection, okay, or Control and B, which is what I will do. So I'm going to do Control and B, and I'd like you just to keep a look at the bottom wave, at the bottom track, Control and B. It adds another track, and it has already labeled it, already named it as label track, okay? So there's no audio in here, but what you're able to do, very basic HTML text, you can't underline or bold or anything like that or change the color. It's pretty, I think you can change the color, but it's basically just what you write. And this is your aid memoir through the editing process that said, it could be something like, really good point about, you know, ethnic minorities. And if you type anything like me, it's invariably full of mistakes. Okay, and it's that aid memoir. Okay, or it could be that you say here for the interlude. That little sort of 20-minute you want to drop in that just reminds people maybe that this is being funded by the National Lottery, by the Heritage Lottery Fund, yeah? Because we can't blow enough smoke up their backsides. So it could be here for the interlude, question mark. As I'm editing this feels like it's a natural point, it might be worth doing. And then you do another couple of minutes, you think, no, actually, no, here's the interlude. This is the interlude here. Oops. Control B, interlude here, okay? Now you can go back and delete that last comment, but you'll presumably have a little bit of a recollection of what you typed and where, okay? Very, very useful. Or it could be that you've got, I don't know, coffin. You know, a really useful tool for helping you navigate. And like I said, if you're navigating more quickly, more efficiently, more effectively, it doesn't half make you feel like you're getting somewhere. Yeah, that is a large part of the thing around confidence. Okay, so that's labeling. It's edit, labels, add label at selection. Yeah. Or it's Control and B, which is what I tend to use just because I've learned it. Okay. I told you about importing the original tracks. So for example, in my example, there's my track, there's Leon's track, there's Gareth's track. We also call him Gareth's track. And you can drag and drop, or you can go to file import, okay? If you then sort of said, actually, I tell you what I wouldn't mind doing, I wouldn't mind dropping in that bit from YouTube, for example, okay? Now you've got a choice. You could either drop it in there, literally there, and that's fine. A better way of doing it, and what actually saves you time in the longer run, is to add a new track, okay? So you go to tracks, add new. Now, mono and stereo, for those of you, because my mum told me about it, vinyl back in the day, Anita's laughing, somebody must have told you this, Anita, you could buy records that were either mono or stereo, okay? So basically, a mono track is what you've got in front of you. There's just one waveform. There's one line of waveform in a track, okay? So I have 3 mono tracks here. I've got my label track as well. Stereo track is a bit different. So if you just look at the work area, I will click on a stereo track and it gives me 2, okay? So what you would have is this repeated twice, okay? basically left channel, right channel, okay? Your channels on your microphone might be damaged. They might be slightly off, so you get more in the left more than the right. You'll see some music channel will be more heavily left than heavily right, yeah? Because of how it was mixed, how it was recorded. So it's not identical. It might look it, but it isn't necessarily if you were to do that. It doesn't make much difference when it comes to editing. Only if you highlight it all, you are having to edit both sides of a stereo track, okay? This isn't the easiest to understand necessarily. What you can do though with a stereo track is split it to mono. Okay, so if you have found that you have recorded and for whatever reason you've gone, how have I done this? I've got stereo tracks. I don't want stereo tracks, not least because they take up twice the size of the screen. So you're forever having to zoom out. You just go track. Remember, you are in control, and then you split the stereo track. Yeah, into two. Did you see that? I'll do that again. So Control and Z to undo. Just look at this line here in the middle of the stereo track. I'll redo it. It just changes, okay? And so now I can move it. I have moved it. It doesn't look like it, but I've moved it, okay? So I'm going to do those again. Alternatively, you can move it down to a mono, okay? And that would condense it all into one, but like I said, don't worry too much about that. So tracks are important. Now that can be a blank track that you then cut and paste. So I can cut and paste that element there, literally Control and C, or edit and copy. I can do that, Control and C, and I can drop it into a new mono track there. And it is like you would do it in Word. Control and V for paste, or copy, sorry, cut and or copy, paste, yeah. And you know, that could be that track that you've recorded off YouTube. It could be that extra bit that you had to re-record because you know the first audio wasn't quite workable. It wasn't quite up to scratch. So it's better to, I would say, to do it here in a new track rather than, as I could copy. Let's move somewhere else in the track. Just look at where I've posted, where the finger is. Okay, I can paste it in there. Now it leaves it highlighted, so it shows me the bit that's being pasted in. Okay, so I'll just undo that again. Okay, that's my track as it originally was. I'm wanting to drop in a piece of audio, piece of spoken, and I'm going to put it there. What that does, it moves, it displaces everything to the right-hand side. Nothing to the left-hand side of the channel happens, but everything to the right is moved, but only in this channel, in this track. Yeah, so I might find that if Leon is talking at this bit and I just drop this in, it still doesn't move. That's probably not the best example. Let's find another. But the thing is, I zoom out. Okay, here's a good one. That bit, so I've still got it, I've still copied it, right? I'm going to Control and paste it there. This track has moved, but these two haven't. So what I now have is
Does your background
noise. Okay, so I'll show you how you get around that in a moment, but it's also why I prefer adding it into a new track, okay, for reasons that will become apparent. Is that clear? Okay, so do you remember when we first did our first ever word processing IT courses way back when? We were told save everything, save it as you go along. What I tend to suggest, and certainly for people who are new to this, I don't tend to do it so much now unless it's a particularly complicated piece of audio. The moment that you've dropped in, so if I go back to the presentation, I've got my 3 tracks, I've unzipped them, I've got my 3 WAV files, and I can either drag and drop or I can file import. As soon as they're in, file, save as, save project as, okay, and give it some title, or whatever that title needs to be, okay. I usually put the word master in. Okay, that gives me my first saved Audacity file. Okay, it says down the bottom, AUP is the suffix, Audacity projects. Okay, that does 2 things. One, it gives it a file name clearly that you can find. It also stores all of the data. These files are enormous. Okay, and it stores. If I move that to another file, and I've separated it out from this folder of master data, it's useless. It is basically useless, okay? So you want to keep these together. It will adopt the file name that you give it, okay? But it's really important if you want to go back and use these files again, or you're editing in 3 or 4 sittings, because it can take a while, you need to keep these together, okay? Now this is quite basic IT literacy, I understand that, but there's even a greater risk of getting into a pickle here than if you were just writing a side of A4 in Microsoft Word, okay? So it gives you that. Now what you then can do is go, actually, that's my master file. I'm going to save this as project. Might be a useful distinction. This is the one that I'm going to work on. So I'm going to have the master. So my nuclear option, if ever this goes absolutely belly up, is I can go back to that master file and I can start again. Yeah. But I'm going to work on the project file. To give you an idea of how big these files are, you will see the time clicking down. To just save this could take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, depending on how big it is, okay? I'm not going to sit here for all of that. I'm going to cancel, but just wait to do the cleanup. Okay, it's now telling me some stuff. So what I would get, had I gone through with that, is I would get another Audacity file, and it would say Euro 2021 project, because that's the title I gave it. And I would also get another folder here called Euro 2021 project _ data. Okay, I have to keep them together. Okay, now I can move both of them, yeah, to another location, but I can't move one and not the other. I could even move master and keep project here. I don't think there's any point in doing it, but you can do that. Please keep these together. They are worthless without the data files to back them up. Okay. Any questions on that? I've kind of stepped outside of Audacity a little bit, and hopefully I'm not teaching you to suck eggs, but it's really, really important. You can get yourself into a pickle with this otherwise. Okay, what I tend to find is that the more experienced you get is with editing, the more comfortable and confident you are in just editing into your master, okay? But it could be that you think, oh, I've got 50 minutes here, but you know what? Let's put it out in 2 parts, part 1 and part 2, 25 minutes each, or a 30-minute and a 20-minute or whatever. Again, it's good. You need to save it then with those other names. And just try to remember what names you saved them, or where you've saved them, and everything else, okay? So that's as much as I'm going to go into kind of basic IT literacy, I think, he says. But the master and the project file, I think, is a nice technique, nice tip for you early on, just to stay in control, yeah? You've always got that backup of, if you have to, the nuclear option, going back to the very, very raw first audio that you ever had and working on that again. Okay. So that's all of the navigation techniques I'm going to refer to, and these help you just be in control a little bit of your audio that you've got, I think, anyway. Okay, any questions? I haven't looked in chat for a while. Can you remind me, what would you be adding from YouTube? So, for example, if I'm doing the football ones, we might refer back to, I might get some crowd noise off it, or I might get permission from the BBC to use the commentary of a goal, for example, that we're talking about. Or I could be going back into the midst of time and finding something of a game from 1970, which I did. Somebody, his first game was 50 years ago this year, in 1970, came up from Swansea to Cardiff, Fox Wales, play England, and we managed to find the audio of one of the goals that was scored. And he was talking about, 45,000 crowd. It was just an interesting bit of nostalgia, sporting heritage. He didn't tell his parents he was coming up to Cardiff. They'd have been horrified, but he did it anyway on the train. So, that little bit of rich sort of social history, if you like, from Chris from 1970, we were able to just embellish that a little bit, because otherwise it was just me asking questions, him talking, me responding. We embellished that with a little bit of contemporary audio, which I managed to find off YouTube. It's often not great, particularly the old stuff, but again, most people are fine with that. They'll forgive you that, So that's an example. But find anything. But be conscious of copyright, please. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to move on to. Oops. Let's get rid of the chat. Let's go away in the chat. I'm going to go on to volume. Okay, so this is something that most people want to do at some point early on. Let's bring all of these tracks back into the room. Okay, so I've got here, that's probably a bit that could be silenced out, I would imagine. There's a little bit of an overlap here. So what's going on here? Let's have a little listen.
That's been the biggest change I've been through, I think.
It's been the most painful as well.
It's Leon laughing. And I can be clear on that. You hear that? It is quite quiet. Yeah. Okay, so let's enhance that. Okay, let's make that louder. Okay, let's bring it a little bit more into the recording. So you've got a couple of options. The simplest is effect and amplify. And amplify is a tool I use a lot. Okay. And just to be clear, there's a distinction. I thought this for a while actually. Noise reduction, and you can also increase it as well. Is that what I want to do? It's not. It's actually amplification is the better tool for you in this instance. Okay, so the default is Audacity will go, this is where I think you might want to take it in terms of amplification. Just look at the OK. You can see that I can click on OK because it's got the blue line around it. Yeah, again, a little bit of basic IT literacy here. So apologies for patronizing you. Just look at what happens to that OK if I move the cursor to the right. Yeah. It fades, okay? The reason for that is I cannot take it any higher than what it said. So what it's actually saying is not giving you the ideal. It's not intuitively going, Lee, I think you want to take it this high. It's going, this is the maximum range that you've got. What that means is, if I was to amplify that to the maximum, just look at the line in the middle, the waveform. I take it almost to, zoom in a little bit, I take it almost to the limit. What it's saying is, this is the maximum you can take it before the sound distorts, it goes beyond the track, and it's not really workable. Now actually, he's laughing. I don't want him to laugh so loud that you can't hear what I'm saying, particularly because it's my podcast and I'm in charge. Then I'll go, right, that's too much. So I'm going to undo that. Again, Control Z, or I use the icon on the toolbar. I zoomed in a moment ago, so I'm going to Control and 2 just to go back to my standard. This is where I like it. Okay, and I want to amplify it a bit. So you've got a few options here. Consider this almost as a percentage. Okay, so if I go to 0, which is basically the middle, it's quite hard to be precise on this. That's nearest damn it. Okay, you wouldn't hear if I increase it by 0.3. You won't hear the difference. None of us would hear the difference, okay? You've got to be getting to sort of, here. But that's not a huge amount. So if I do 1.3, again, just look at the waveform, okay? It's within range because I can still click on OK. Anybody notice that? Barely noticeable. It's a percentage. So you're starting from a small base because there's very little sound there, yeah? If I increase that up here, let's color it. If I increase that bit by 0.3, repeat amplify, so I'm just doing exactly the same step. If you look at it, the notice on the middle track was barely noticeable. This is noticeable. It's a percentage. 1% of 10 is bigger than 1% of 100, even though it's 1%. Does that make sense? So I've given you basic IT, basic maths, sorry, patronizing you all. So this is key. The relevance of this is, let's undo that. Let's go back to Leon, amplify. I'm going to give it, I reckon I can give it about a 5, 6, there you go, 6.3, okay? Now I've got two choices. I can preview it, listen. I've not done it, it's just given me a flavor of what it would sound like. And I might go, yeah, that's okay. So I'll do it, okay? Do you see that? So I'll undo it and I will do it again. 6.3 was the figure. I'll redo it. So look at the waveform highlighted. I've got a lot more of it now, okay? If I did 6.3 on this, it almost doubles because it's a percentage, okay? If I was to go, I want it a bit more, I'm going to repeat it, which is effect, repeat amplify, Control on R. it's doing 6.3 of that, not 6.3 of the earlier bit. Does that make sense? So about the basic arithmetic here. So you can very quickly, by thinking, oh, I'll do it again, you can be really quickly not out of control, but you can go beyond what you actually wanted to do. But it's a really simple way of just giving a little bit more to a piece that is quiet, because what happens is if I've got the mic here and I kind of like keep talking, but I'm looking over there, my sound has gone over there. So even within the rest of the track is fine, that bit is quiet, you can just bring it back up. The other simplest way of doing it is using the waveform elsewhere in the same track, and you just do it visually. So forget the numbers, you just look to get it similar to what it looks like either side, because that's the tone and the level at which the person was previously speaking and will continue to, or will return to perhaps. So you can use the numbers, you can use just use your eyes as a visual guide, but Amplify is a really, really useful tool. Sorry, you need to highlight, okay, and its effect and its Amplify. You don't need to worry about clipping, you don't need to worry about peak amplitude. You can also take the noise out by doing everything that I've said, but in reverse, downwards, below, whatever the phrase is, okay? So if, for example, I'm a little bit too loud here, literally go effect, amplify, I want to take out, I'll go negative, I want to take out 2.6. If you look at the clip, look at the waveform and it reduces, okay? Very simple tool. And of course, because I've got individual tracks, because that's what Clean Feed gives me, I can amplify one and not the other. If I had just a single track of the two of us, I would be amplifying everything. And if I am already louder than Leon, all I'm doing is just making that differential the same, but just louder or quieter. No use to anybody. Really, really useful tool. Okay. I showed you silence, didn't I? But I'm going to show it again. Just let's get rid of the laughing because I don't want it. Okay, I just highlight what I want and I go to silence. It's a really, really useful tool, and it gets rid of, sometimes you get the hissing, yeah, or you get, particularly if someone who maybe is, if they've got a mic that's around the neck, okay, and the mic is here where the keys are, it rubs, and that can be quite annoying. Maybe quite loud and intrusive. That is a really good, silence is really useful for getting rid of that. As well as, like I said, other background noises. So silence I love. Okay, there's another way in which I can enhance the audio level, the amplification. So if I can just borrow your ears again, and this is me talking.
It's been the most painful as well.
It's been the most painful as well. I'm a little bit stuttery there. I'm going to get rid of that. So that's silence. There we go.
Been through, I think.
It's been the most painful as well.
It's been the most painful as well. There's a lot of pain involved in following Wales in football. Now, what I can do is I can either amplify that, as I just showed you, alternatively, and it has less nuance and there is less. This is less discerning, but it's nonetheless useful. If you cast your mind back to the slides, and it had three tracks: perfect, too quiet, too loud. If you know that someone is too quiet and all of it is too quiet, okay, but you think it's still rescuable, you click here, okay? So over here, on the left-hand side is gain, okay? All microphones have a gain function. Gain is like volume, but a bit different. So volume, we're comfortable with. Volume is the sound of something. The volume of this laptop now, the volume of my voice in your speakers, your headphones, or whatever, is the level at which the sound is coming out. In recording terms, gain, quite simply, is this volume going in. And it isn't the same necessarily as what comes out. You can control the two, okay? Now, controlling volume, we're all comfortable with. We do that on a TV, we do it on a radio. Controlling gain, not so much, because most of us don't need that. So what I can do right from the word go, I can increase the gain level of my track. None of the others, and I can do it for them, but I have control over this. I can control it. So the default is always naught. Equally, I can take it out. So if you just listen to me at naught level gain again. Gain.
It's been the most painful as well.
Okay, and I'm going to increase that just so you notice it. I'm going to increase that to 7.
It's been the most painful as well.
It's a bit more in your ears. Again, I can hear it really clearly here, okay? What that has done, although it hasn't changed the track, it hasn't changed the waveform at all, Yeah, it's just basically amplified everything. Yeah, it's like taking something off the middle shelf and putting it on the top shelf. Okay, it has just amplified everything. So it's very, very undiscerning. Okay, but it's a really useful shortcut. And you will notice that already as a default, when I was working on this, I'd increased Leon quite a bit because he tuned in on his phone. So a phone microphone's not as good as a laptop microphone, not as good as a nice fancy microphone. So I just had to increase him completely. Okay. Okay, editing. I've showed you cut and copy and paste, Control and C, Control and X for cut, Control and C for copy, Control and V for paste, exactly as it is in Word. Splitting is really, really good, particularly if you want to insert a track. So let's split this track here, okay? What I want to do, I want to drop my interlude in, for example, and I want to split this track. So I know that the shortcut is Control and I. And if you just watch where I've placed the hand by here, the line is quite thin. If I Control and I, it gets thicker, okay? I'll undo that, and I will go to Edit, and I will go to Clip Boundaries, and I will go to Split, where I see the Control and I is the shortcut, okay? And it does exactly the same thing, so it's just thickened that line. This is where the time shift comes in. I can now move this track, yeah? Which is really, really useful because I want to insert that bit here, but I don't want it talking over me. So I want to be able to move that bit, and I want to move Gareth's bit along. So I can put in exactly the same cut, and what hopefully it does, it'll just highlight. Do you see as I'm moving the cursor, where exactly do I need to cut it for Gareth? Oh, it's there. It tells me. It's quite intuitive like that, Audacity. I like it. Control and I, another split, and I can move his as well. Yeah. Now, if I wanted to cut here, and this is where the sync locking tool comes in, Control and I. So I've now got 3 splits, 3 tracks, 3 splits, okay? And I'm going to drop something in the middle here, maybe. I can drop it in there, or I can add a new track, or whatever, okay? Or I can drag and drop it in. But I want all of us to be moved forward the same amount, yeah? So I want Gareth, so all to be in sync. Otherwise, only one track moves, if you remember, and then it's all out to sync further downstream, if you like, in terms of the recording. So this is where the sync lock comes in. Tracks sync lock on and off. So it's now ticked, which means it's on. And if I go into here, I'd like you to, let's see what I'll do. Right, yeah. I move them all. This is such a labor-saving device. Yeah. If I untick it, I can just now move Gaz. Yeah. So sync lock allows you, if you want to drop something in at the middle, or indeed at the start, actually, if you want to go back and drop in your audio track, it allows you to keep everything that comes after it in sync. Okay. Believe you me, once you get the hang of this one, it saves a huge amount of faffing. Particularly if you kind of go, oh, that would be amazing. That bit of YouTube I just found, I want to drop it in. And then you've just got to nightmare. So sync lock is good and you can control it. Yeah. Back and just off. You basically toggle it off and on. Okay. And you use it for the time shift tool. Okay. Now, if you see, I can move this track. I'm moving quite far, moving quite far, moving quite far. Oh, and then I can't move. That is because I highlight the whole track. It only allows you to go as far as the next split. Oops. Okay, so that's the next split. So that is all one section within the same track because I've highlighted it. I click back. I've toggled sync lock off, so I'm only able to move one track. I can't move it past. As much as I want to, it won't let me. So if 7 minutes ago you go and I want to move that forward by 30 seconds, but you can't, it's because you have a split of less than 30 seconds downstream later on in the track. You can't do that, otherwise it would overwrite it. It would literally just, you can't do it. So you've got, but that's where again, you would zoom out to get a better global view of the section that you've got. This is a better example, I suppose, because you've just got a smaller, shorter section there. So I can move it, but I don't have a huge margin of error. I'd have to move that a lot more. Okay. Now what I would do to buy myself maybe a little bit more is that silence. I know it's silenced because I've silenced it, but if I want to be certain, I'll just silence it again. Okay. The highlight bit, and click Control and I, it splits it at either end. And I can then just go delete. Okay. And so I've got a tiny little bit there that I don't want. I bought myself more room. Okay. That's as much as I'm going to show you about split, but it's a useful little tool if you want to drop something in, if you want to move something about, or if, for example, you just find yourself that you've spoken over somebody, or if you're deleting and you're sync locking, okay? So if I want to delete that bit, it deletes everything, yeah? So I'll just go delete as I would on that, and they all move.
Russell, sorry to interrupt, just to let you know we've got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, so just show that again, Control and Z, delete, they all move in sync, yeah? Now, if I did that without, and maybe, as I often do, forget to tally it, I will delete, and it only moves one. They're now all out of sync, yeah? So sync lock tracks feature is really good if you're deleting. Yeah, so it's like, you know what, that's the bit where I was talking about, right, guys? Anything else that you want to cover now today? Have we covered everything? Yeah, okay, so there's 20 seconds worth of audio that I don't want, but I want to take it off everybody's track, even though only one person is talking. I know that everything subsequent is in sync, all right? Okay, fading in, fading out very quickly. Okay, so here we go. What have we got here? Who's this talking? So let's solo it.
Crusoe, welcome, episode 97. It's
Oh, I got that. I got a little pause, and I've kind of gone straight into it. So, you know, I'm going to ease people into the conversation. So I'm going to highlight the bit that I want to fade in. I go to Effect, and I go to Fade in, and it simply does that. I'm just going to do that for you a moment. Do you see? So it reduces it so that it tapers in, I suppose, as opposed to tapers out, which I'll show you in a moment. So I'll redo it. Effect, fade in. Now let's hear it back.
Crusoe, welcome, episode 97.
It's not very noticeable, but it is there. It is there.
Crusoe, welcome, episode 97.
You just feel it kind of coming up, can't you? Tell you what I'll do is, let's take a much longer bit. And the longer you do, the longer the fade in is, to the extent that it might actually be inaudible at the start. So this is something you've got to be aware of.
Crusoe, welcome, episode 97. It's podcast Peldroid. You know the drill.
There we go. Do you hear that? Okay. Fading out. Say, for example, I want to fade out. Usually at the end you want to do it. So let's do this. I want to fade this bit out. What am I saying?
There may be somebody that...
Oh, a bit loud, actually. That's because I increased the gain, didn't I, of course?
There may be somebody that Bowie would want to build a team around, albeit at League One.
Right, so that's how it sounded originally. I'm going to fade that out, literally Effect, fade out. It tapers off.
There may be somebody that Bowie would want to build a team around, albeit at League One.
Yeah. Well, that's useful if you want to just fade the speech out and bring your music in as your outro track. Or like I said, if you've got two discrete parts that they don't knit together. So I'm just going to, it's a production kind of feature. I'm going to fade that bit out. That means this bit's coming to a close, but the next bit's starting again. Yeah, it's the same people, but we're talking about different things or whatever. Okay, so I have a track that I want to drop in. Let me just click here. So this is the theme tune we use on the football one. I have the permission to use it because I know the guy who wrote it and he said I could use it. But equally, to envelope it. Let's do enveloping because you wanted to do that. Okay, so what I've got here is the spoken tracks pre-prepared. Let's stop share. I've got to share that again, haven't I? Bear with me. There we go. I've got the pre-prepared intro re-recorded. So pre-prepared intro spoken word, and I've labeled the track so I can navigate these. The intro music, there's the outro spoken text, and this is for the Sport England project because it says up in the top left-hand corner, the generic SE. So that's kind of my shorthand to know that's Sports England. I've got the outro music, and I've also got my mid. Okay, all in one file. I could have them in separate files, but this works for me. So I'm going to go solo, and I'm going to unmute that one. And anyone who's listened to the Sporting Notes will recognize it.
You're listening to a specific themed series of Sporting Heritage podcasts related to our Disability and Women's Sports project.
So that's the track. What I've used the enveloping technique feature here, okay, which is these two little triangles and the blue line. You click on your track, as you can see, I've already done this several times to give you the dots, okay? You can put the dots anywhere, and that allows you to pinch, okay? So if I think, well, actually, the music is a bit too quiet under my words, my spoken, I'll just amplify it a little bit. So how does that sound? We'll have a little listen. So mute that.
You're listening to a specific themed series of Sporting Heritage podcasts related.
It's too loud. It's too loud. So no, I don't fancy that. I'm going to click back, and I need to take it right down. And again, use your eyes as much as anything. I can see that that is the same as that, is the same as that, is the same as that bit. So there's a consistent level I'm taking it down to, okay? And then I just drop this is where the tool shift comes in, because if I've recorded all that in one sitting, I don't wait to think, how many beats have I got to count? 4, 5, and then speak. I'll just record it, I split it, and then I can move it around. Ooh. Sorry. I don't want to move it all together. I just want to move me within that track. So this is where the two features combine. They're really, really useful. Okay. So that's enveloping. It's that little triangle and line. And you literally just click where you want to on your track and you pinch it. Okay. You're not taking anything in or out of the track. And then you can overlay whatever text that you want. Okay. And all you do is literally line it up. Really, I do by eye. You line up where it gets a bit quiet. You can fade it maybe, and equally I can fade my spoken bit in a little bit, yeah. But basically, you just line it up like that, and then what I do is let's say, right, I've got all of my intro ready. I'm going to highlight all of that. Control and C for copy, and I'm going to go into the other track, and I'm just going to paste it in. Okay, and there's that's the spoken bit. You want to put it into there. Okay. I can add a new stereo track. It's just control and paste, and then it goes. Okay, so that's me talking, and I can add the line underneath. Okay, that's enveloping. Doing too many things now. The big files, as I say. So yeah, that's it. You have your final thing, and then what am I doing that wrong here? What isn't it like? Okay. So I have my final. Why is it saying paused? Let's go back in. I have my final file. We're on the final close. So I save the project as the master, okay, as you would, or as the project file. I then need to export it because it's not usable. So you have these options. Export as MP3 is your standard. Okay, you'll probably want to keep it in the same folder as the master. So I've got master. It says it's an MP3 file. You can type whatever title you want in. Quality standard is fine, but if you want to increase the bit rate, you can do so. You then click save, and it will save it as an MP3. It then invites you for the metadata, and this is important. What I would suggest is, for the first time you do this, you type in artist names. So it's Podcast Poldroid, it's Kate Turner, it's Toolbar UK. Okay, an individual title for your track. What's the episode called? You don't need an album title, but what we have to do, for example, is talk about the distinct projects that Sport and Heritage have. So it could be, so the title track is about armed forces and hockey as part of the Armed Forces, Sport and Heritage Armed Forces project. Track number 4, 500, whatever it might be, you give it a year and so on. Once you've done that once, you save it, okay? And then what you can do then is just load it the next time. So here's the Sport and Heritage of Disability and Women's Sport. and I've already got it preset. Because one of the things that I have an absolute mind blank of doing is it disability in women's or is it women's and disability? We want to be consistent. So yeah, so that data. Now I might want to add something else in here. So I might want to talk about stool ball, yeah. And then I would click OK, and it will save that, and it will take a long time depending on the size of the file, okay, potentially. Okay. But it's important you export it with the metadata and that you keep all the files together, I would suggest, because it's easier to retrieve them at a later date. That is it. So I'm going to stop share and go back to my presentation, wherever you are. Where are you? Can't see you. And there we go. Oh, that one's from here. That's what I wanted. Oh, no, I've done it again. Sorry. There. So thank you very much, Diolch fawr. That was specifically what I wanted to do. So hopefully you've gone through the audio, you're a bit more confident with those core features. Importing the additional tracks, stereo, mono tracks for the old timers in the room, bit of nostalgia. Some background audio, so it's that envelope, I'm still not sure, enveloping, it's that tool, which is really, really useful. Best thing to do is play around with it. The navigation, I spent a bit of time on it, but I think once you've mastered that, it doesn't have to make it feel like you're making progress and that you're in control. And if you're in control, then you feel a bit more confident and assertive to tackle what are quite big, complicated beasts. And we looked at splitting, labeling and reordering, all of which kind of help navigate, help edit. And those, I think, are the basic and the core features. There's others, but those are the basic and the core. Master those, and you're a long way to getting, you know, the sort of quality and the standard that you would want. So this are the contact details. Thanks once again to Belinda, to Kate. Thanks to Art Fund. Thanks to Sport and Heritage. Well done to Katie for her first effort. I don't know whether there's anything she's going to go back and try off the back of that. But yeah, best of luck with all of your future efforts.
You, Russell, that was really, really fab. A lot of information there. I hope that has answered some of the questions that some of you have had about barriers to editing. Do get in touch with us using these contact details if you do have further questions, or if you give it a go and you just have something extra to ask. I know we've spoken to you before about the project. I think everybody is here. But just to remind you, this is part of a series of 5 workshops, webinar workshops. And there'll be 3 more in the new year, which will look at building your online audience, delivering a virtual session, and also finding some funding for your digital projects. So look out for those links on Twitter and in the newsletter. I know that I've also told you about our asset collection. We're looking to collect some film and podcasts related to some of the work that you're doing in the sector. We'll be able to share that on the Sporting Heritage network, which will be a chance for you to grow your audience through the network, but also to help us celebrate what's going on. So if you don't have any additional questions at the moment, then thank you very much. I'll be sending out some evaluation as usual in the next couple of days. And I'll link back to all of those resources that we've already made, including Russell's tutorial all about using clean feeds, so you can kind of pull it all together. But yes, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.